Be aware that this episode makes strong references to suicide, depression, and lots of other things we consider mental health struggles. But I'm posing the difficult questions in this episode. Is the mental health conversation making things better, or is it making us sicker? Is it time to start to really try and get the pendulum to swing somewhere more central? Yes, we don't want to go back to what it was like when nobody talked about anything and it was all clouded in shame. But are we at risk of normalising things that really shouldn't be happening in the name of love, compassion, and breaking stigma? I'm not going to pretend that I give you the answers in this episode, but I pose a lot of questions. I believe we need more difficult and crunchy conversations, and I'll continue to try and bring them on the Dysfunctional podcast. Buckle up, be prepared to feel uncomfortable, and I hope you take a lot from this episode. Dysfunction is everywhere, in our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can't or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. So after a 2-week break, I'm back, and I've just got me on my own again, and it is probably still through a lack of organization on my part. But I promise you, next week we are back with guests. It's been crazy, having been in LA for my first ever event that I co-hosted with Dr. Sherry, which was a roaring success. My feet have barely touched the ground since I've been back. And I did have an episode booked in, but I was unable to call it. Some stuff come up, so I was unable to do it. But today, it was World Mental Health Day, one day next week. What's the date today? So 3 days ago. 12th, 11th, Friday. So Friday was World Mental Health Day. And so I wanted to talk about that. And I wanted to pose the question, is the mental health conversation making us sicker? I've not got any stats for you on it, right? But I do think that we've been talking about mental health now, right? When I first started doing this work 8 years ago, it wasn't being talked about as much. It is being talked about now, right? You can't deny that it is being talked about. It's being talked about everywhere. And so does it really feel like people's mental health, whatever that means, is improving? And if not, what is the conversation doing wrong? What does it need to improve on? And I think we should be posing these difficult questions of, are we making shit worse? Are we making shit worse? And now, listen, the reason I say that is on Friday, on World Mental Health Day, it was Ricky Hatton's funeral. Now, let me be really clear about this. I don't want to start trying to talk about somebody else's life or death. And as far as I'm aware, it's not been publicly confirmed how Ricky passed away. But you get the sense that the ways that he felt and his struggles had something to do with it. And irrespective of that, he's a man who publicly struggled a lot throughout his life. And as a man who does the same, I find life difficult. I'm going to be truthful with you. I just want to talk about some really crunchy things when it comes to when we lose somebody that struggles in that way, and as a result of that, it raises questions around suicide, and when people end their own life. And again, let me just caveat that by saying I don't know if that's what happened to Ricky Hatton, but it's certainly brings back that conversation and gets people talking about it. And so before I sort of like dive right into that, I just want to talk about what it's like to be somebody that, because I'm somebody that struggles with life, right? I find life difficult. I mean, I've probably talked in length on this podcast about that, but I'm not somebody, I hear people often say that the biggest fear of people is the fear of dying. And I'm like, really? Because I fear living more than I fear dying, right? And I say that with a little giggle in there because I think when you have a mind like mine, and many will relate to this, when you have a mind like mine, you have to laugh sometimes, otherwise you'd be crying and like desperately miserable all the time. And so I think dark humor becomes a bit of a coping mechanism. But I'm somebody who's like, I can't think about the idea of living until I'm 90 because, when I'm in a struggle, I'm like, that's 50 years, man. That's longer than I've been here. It just feels like a mountain to climb for me. And I think, look, I'm going to talk as a man for a moment, and I don't know if it's the same for other genders. Listen, maybe it is, but a lot of my day-to-day life, I can't be fully authentic. And the reason I can't be fully authentic is because I have to sort of like almost lie to myself a little bit. I have to kid myself a little bit. Otherwise, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. And so you get up, you get on, and you try your best and you go through. And look, it's not like that every day for me. But there are times and periods when life does feel like it gets on top, and that can feel like regular. Yeah. And you can feel like life is a fight, right? So the reason I want to say that is because, one, I know that I'm not alone in that. I know that's true for a lot of men, and I'd imagine it's true for a lot of other genders too, right? And the reason that I raised that is because I do a lot of work, right? And so I've got some amazing people in my life. And when I spend time with them and when I think about my life with them, then I see things completely differently, right? All of a sudden I'm like, yeah, man, like my time with them and in this world, I want to live as long as I can, right? So there is a contradiction there, of course, right? But I just want to talk about, I'm talking today about like the more difficult times. And listen, they are more regular than I'd fucking like them to be. That's just the truth of it. And I am a bit like that, And like 15 years ago, when everybody was being diagnosed with bipolar, I was diagnosed with bipolar. It's a whole different story that I'm not going to go into today, but I don't sort of buy into that now. I don't think that you can be somebody that feels as deeply as I do and not live a life where you're up and down. Because actually, when you feel as deeply as I do and you live in a world that we live in, I actually think what happens is you should be like bumbling along the bottom, feeling down all of the time, but you don't want to live like that. So actually the highs are actually you doing everything that you can to try and enjoy life. I don't think that in the West, at least in the way that we see the world, I don't think it makes sense to be like to feel good here. I don't think you can feel things really, really deeply and feel good all of the time without fucking completely switching off, which I'm kind of in the process of doing now, like as in sorting out my phone addiction. Anyway, but I digress and I'm going on a tangent. Maybe I'll talk about that on another episode. So the point I want to make is that whenever we are opening up the conversation, this is the first point I'm going to make. And in fact, let me just summarize quickly. I'm going to talk about how sometimes I think if we normalize certain conversations, we miss out crunchy part of the conversations which are important. And then I might talk about some pathologization stuff. Sorry, I'm jumping about the houses a little bit here. But so when you're somebody that struggles a lot, and you may have regular feelings of feeling like it's too much, like you want to run away, like you want to disappear, those kind of things, right? And they come into my mind like a lot. And by the way, again, so as a bit of a side point here, for some people listening, that might sound frightening, but it's not as frightening as it sounds, or it is frightening. Maybe that's the point I'm trying to make. But like, they're there. These are things that lots of people like me manage all of the time. So the point I wanted to make is that we rightly, when somebody in the public eye, and I'm going to stop talking specifically about specific people now because I don't want it to sound like I'm talking about them in general. But when somebody who is liked in the public eye, and there's been many examples of this, die by suicide, there is often an outpouring of love, of care, of affection. People talk very highly of them. There's lots of love and compassion for these people. And I think that one of the issues that can sometimes raise, right? And I've read stuff in the past about this where there can be upturns in other people, like unaliving themselves. And I'll use that term just because I don't know why I'm using it, to be honest with you. But there can be an upturn of people doing that when they see it in the press and it's happened to a good person. And I felt a bit of that when at Ricky Hatton's funeral. I felt a bit of like, it coincided with feeling a bit down. And I'm not saying that I looked at it and thought, wow, he's getting a lot of love, an admiration, I'm going to do it. But you do, if you're not careful, you can see that and hear that and think, and you can forget about the absolute destruction and devastation that suicide causes for the people that are left behind. So I can feel myself feeling uncomfortable talking about this, because that's why I want to come away from talking about a specific person, and talk about suicide in general. But there's an outpouring of love and affection for these people when they die by suicide. And if you're somebody that might be teetering on the edge of suicide, I can see through my own personal feelings and experiences, although I'm not one of those people that's teetering, let me be really clear about that. But I can see that, I can recognize through my own internal reflection when these things happen, how if you were somebody that was teetering on the edge, you could see that outpour of love and affection. And perhaps that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So is there a risk in talking only sharing love and affection, this? And I'm not saying we should demonize them. I'm not saying we should criminalize them or anything like that. I'm just posing the question. I'm sort of saying, do we need to have these bigger, crunchier conversations where we make sure that we remember that the absolute devastation that is left behind when somebody dies by suicide? To remind the people that might be watching and going, Lord, look at this. Look at what they've received. Maybe it'll be okay. Maybe people will see, remember me in a positive light, and I'll get to go. And I do think, and this is something that I never used to understand when I first started talking about my experiences publicly and openly, but there is always a risk that when you normalize conversations, you fucking normalize the thing. There's an example of this. When Princess Diana talked about her bulimia openly for the first time, loads of people started going to their doctor and saying, I'm bulimic. Princess Diana talked about it. There was a huge outpouring of love and affection for her, and support and connection and all of that sort of stuff. And so there was a big upturn in people going to the doctors with their own struggles with bulimia. Originally, you just think, well, this is fucking amazing, right? There's all these people that have been suffering before and they're now coming out and talking about it. But actually, there were some studies that were done, and people looked deeper into it and actually found that actually a lot of these people became bulimic as a result of her talking about her bulimia. These were not, this is not like, I'm not saying these were emotionally secure and healthy people running about and just became bulimic because they caught it, right? That's not what I'm talking about. But these were people that were in distress, that were struggling, and then they saw what happened and subconsciously started to think that bulimia is a way to get connection, to get the connection that they crave that looks like getting the attention. So please don't hear that and say that I'm saying, oh, people are using it and to become attention seekers. In the negative sense, I do believe that when you're in the darkness, when you're feeling alone, your body is scrambling for connection, and so you will do things that could ultimately get you attention. And it just got me thinking about all of the ways that all of the labels that we use in today's world. So we've got the whole range of neurodivergent labels now that are there. So you've got things like ADHD, you've got things like autism now, which has become a much wider spectrum. And so one might be able to see how, if you are, let's say if you were a 13-year-old, so you're just starting to go through puberty, you feel a little bit different to everybody else. You feel like you sort of don't fit in. You're just a little bit different. You find it social interactions slightly difficult, but maybe that's your struggle, rather than a community that just accepts you like that and helps you to discover who you are. One might be able to see how that 13-year-old may get drawn into more quote unquote symptoms of ADHD to make themselves fit into that category, because there they'll find acceptance and community. So the same is true for things like depression even, right? So let's take the depression, and then we sort of in more recent years, and I mean in more recent sort of last few decades, we've now got what we call clinical depression, and they try to market that as a chemical imbalance, and before realizing, that it came out that was basically a marketing ploy. And people will say that I'm saying that flippantly, but it was sort of proved that there's no evidence of a chemical imbalance when it comes to depression. But let's say that if you were trapped in a marriage that you didn't want to be in, go into a job that you hated, you could see how you could suppress those two things, because they both feel like too much of a mountain to climb, and then subconsciously or consciously lean into all the other symptoms of clinical depression in order to get yourself a diagnosis of depression. How many people are one of them people that I've just talked about, trapped in a marriage that they don't want to be in, go into a job that they hate, and have found themselves on medication for depression that's like this clinical thing that we've created, when actually, and so they'll never or they're much, much less likely to challenge themselves to try and change the things that are keeping them down. See, similar is true when it comes to self-harming. So you want to normalize the conversation around it so that people don't suffer in silence and suffer in complete shame and don't feel like they can't talk to anyone about it. And there is a risk of normalizing it too much, that it becomes a way that young people, or anyone in fact, see a way to communicate their distress. So one can see how problematic that becomes. So what I'm trying to sort of point to here is that there is always a difficult balance to be had as a society and as a people, of how much we normalize stuff without talking about the devastation and all the other crunchy, horrible stuff that we don't want to talk about. The impact of all of these things, be it self-harm, be it depression, be it suicide, the impact of all of these things on other people, on your loved ones, on yourself, right? And I'm not going to give you necessarily any answers here, but I'm just questioning. So when I say, is the mental health conversation making things better or worse, making us more sick is what I'm suggesting, or it's not what I'm suggesting. It's a question that I'm posing. Go back 50 years and nobody's talking about it and it's all in complete darkness. We absolutely don't want to go back there. But do we want to be at this opposite end of the spectrum where we're almost normalizing all of these things that are not normal? It's not normal for a human to want to end their own life. It's not normal. It's not normal. So something's going on. If as a human being, if you reach that space, something is going on. And so how do we toe that line where we do normalize it and we don't make people feel like they are different or not normal, which completely contradicts what I've just said, right? But how do we have these conversations more appropriately so that we don't swing the pendulum too far that way? So that you know, and this kind of links into the hang on a minute, the pathologization of being human, right? So now, like, lots of young people will say that, you know, I'm struggling with my mental health. So you ask them, what does that mean? Oh, well, you know, I'm feeling very stressed and anxious. And you're like, what's going on in your life? And actually what you find is that how they feel is very appropriate based on what they're experiencing. I think we're seeing it in the workforce, right? And you know, again, this is a crunchy conversation because there are still lots of toxic work environments out there that are pushing people to the point of fucking absolute breakdown. I don't really like the word burnout, but absolute breakdown. And there are young people that are going into the workplaces, and the moment that they feel any kind of stress, tension, or anxiety, are taking the foot off their gas and telling the leadership team or telling their charger and their managers, this is too stressful for me. I'm feeling anxiety. I need a mental health day, right? Again, it's crunchy for me to say that because, like, the way that you're supposed to speak if you go on fucking LinkedIn is you're supposed to be virtuous and say, oh, well, you know, if it's too much, then it's, you know, it's not worth it. If it's costing you your mental health, then it's costing you too much. And it's like, what does that even fucking mean? Because if you want to be successful in any aspect of your life, personal, work, relationships, family, you're gonna have to do stuff besides yourself. If we truly thought that saying if it costs your mental health, it's too much, no one would have kids because it's too much of a risk. Because for the fucking first 2 years of, definitely the first 2 years, arguably the fucking first 18 and beyond, but definitely the first 2 years, yeah, you are at very high risk of not being able to fucking deal with your own mental health. Anyone that's raised kids will tell you that, if they're being honest with you. I mean, there might be some people out there doing it perfectly, but I think that we're fucking wired to forget how hard the first 2 years are, because if we fucking remembered, nobody would have more than one kid. And I got 6. So what was the original point I'm making? So like, we have to be careful with our language. We have to be careful. Like, are you struggling with your mental health, or are you feeling down? Because if you're feeling down, like, don't forget that's fucking normal, especially if you've got some bad shit going on. And so we have to be careful of this, the pathologization of stuff. And I just wonder if we need to pivot again a bit back to talking about the risks of some of these things. I don't see, I'm trying to think if I do. Because we are trying to be loving and compassionate towards people that struggle with what I would call despair, and rightly so, we should be doing that. We're not openly talking about all of the other stuff. I know when I'm down and I'm in it and I can't get out of it, it can't be easy to be with me. As a friend, in a romantic relationship, anything. It can't be easy to be with me. I know what it's like to lose somebody to suicide. The anger that you feel. The absolute despair that you feel. But sometimes you only see the person that does it being romanticized. And again, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. I'm just saying that we have to be careful that we don't paint a picture that it's like, oh, you know, what a great person. We loved them. They had their troubles and all that sort of stuff. Again, we should be doing that. But how do we make sure that we raise awareness for the absolute devastation that these things cause for the people that love them? You know, the same, I look at all the support and the things that I've done for children of alcoholics over the years. People didn't want to talk about children of alcoholics a couple of decades ago, even a decade. It's still fucking difficult now. They don't want to talk about them because it makes it hard for the alcoholic. Like, you go into these recovery spaces, people fucking don't, you know, everybody wants to celebrate the recovery and the sobriety of all the people over here. Nobody wants the child of the alcoholic to be coming in the room saying, yeah, it's great that you're all sober. I'm still fucked as a result of that. So it's sort of still one of the things that gets swept under the carpet. And so, like, the devastation that happens when suicide or mental health, desperate, you know, difficult things happen to people, the devastation that's left behind is not something that's, I don't know if we're talking about it enough. I don't know if it would help. Again, I'm posing these questions. And like, how do we get the balance right of being loving and compassion towards people when they're really struggling, and then also being able to say, come on now, I need to get you going. So listen, I'll tell you now, right? At the point of recording this today, it's Monday. I went into a spiral on Friday. A accumulation of a bunch of things. Actually, when you look at it, as somebody who is very sensitive in the way that I am, the spiral sort of makes sense to me. But I spiraled. And as a result of it, I wasn't in a great place. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm just not. I'm like fighting. I'm fucking fighting. It got to its worst point. I mean, like, Sunday I struggled because I was with my children and stuff, and then so that makes it even harder, right? Because I'm overstimulated and all of that sort of stuff. I think nowadays people would be like, you need to rest, you need to take, but that's not, like, I had to say this morning, come on now. I say it's like a metaphoric splash of cold water on my face. Come on, I can't stay down there. I've got to get up. I've got I've got to get a bit of fight. I've got to go. I've got to fucking sort myself out. And so like, how do we get that balance right between like, oh yeah, no, if it's your mental health, take what you need. It's like, yeah, but let's make sure that like we need to give you space, love and compassion, and like we got to find a way as well. And it's like there's polar ends of the discussion here, and I don't think we want to be at either of those polarized ends. We want to find somewhere in the middle. So let me try and pull this together. Awareness saves lives. Let me be really clear about that. I will always advocate for love and compassion. It's what was missing for me. It's what's been missing for me often in my struggles. And I think we need to have difficult conversations. I think we need to have crunchy conversations. I think we need to constantly reevaluate where the mental health conversation is going and whether we're getting it right and whether we need to pivot, change, and move in a different direction. I don't know the answers, but I think we should pose the questions. I don't want less awareness. I don't want people to stop talking about this, but I think we need to update the conversation. I think we need to make sure that we're talking about the crunchy stuff. I think we need to make sure that we talk about the seriousness and severity of some of these things to remind all of us the impact that it has. We don't want to swing the pendulum right back the other way. I just think that we need to start trying to get it back towards the middle. So yeah, I'm going to summarize. I think I'm going to summarize now. I don't know how long I've been doing this, but I'm going to summarize. And I'll do that. I'll summarize by reflecting personally. Look, I have days when I'm really down. I try to normalize the way that I talk about them. Perhaps some of the work that I need to do is to make sure that I don't romanticize that. Content maybe does that a little bit as well. Like, we're not alone. But I've got to learn to love myself in those down days so that I can have the up days. And that's kind of how I think my life works. I don't want less awareness. I think awareness needs to keep growing. I just think it needs to evolve. I think it needs to, I guess in many ways, what's happened to awareness is what happens to everything. Some of it's been fucking monetized by ultra capitalism, right? But then we removed all the difficult emotion from it as well? Because that's what makes us feel better and that's what makes us feel comfortable. And do we need to have proper conversations? We need to continue to make sure that people aren't stigmatized for what they've done. And we need to make sure that people hear the truth of the devastation of what it's like to struggle and be in despair. And then then it comes back to everything else that I talk about. How do we create systems and structures and cultures and communities that better support these people that struggle in the way that they do, myself being one of them. So yeah, look, I felt that I was uncomfortable at times talking about it but that's what this podcast is about. Yeah, listen, as always, I'm open to feedback. I'm open to hearing what you think about it. And I'll finish by saying this as well. Last year, I've had lots of people. I posted on World Mental Health Day as an ambassador of Calm, campaigned against living miserably. I'm now an ambassador for them, by the way, which is amazing. And I talked about like a really difficult period that I'd been through earlier in the year. I don't think I highlighted that it was earlier in the year. But it was earlier in the year. I feel like I'm through that now, by the way. So I'm like in a much better place. But I was inundated as a result of that with messages of people checking in with me. I responded to some of them and then ran out of steam, and it becomes a little bit difficult to sort of saying that. So to go back to everybody and say I'm okay. So I really, really appreciate everybody reaching out in the way that they did. But just know that I'm doing good now. And how I felt and what I went through was completely appropriate for my personal experience of what was happening in my life at the time. I'm actually very private about what goes on in my personal life. I try and keep my work and the content I create and this all very separate from my personal life, because I try and keep a level of sacredness, I would say, in my personal life. But I got to wind this up. So I hope you got something from that. But what I would say, and what I always finish when it's just me, is I don't know what happened. I don't know what we've talked about. But I've messed it up. Fucking hell. Let's go again. But I'm Josh Connolly, and this was definitely dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.